Emma Hayes had always carried herself with quiet strength. At 34, she had learned that life rarely went as planned. Years ago, she thought she had everything figured out: a fiancé, a wedding date, and a future she could almost touch. But plans can fall apart, and hers did, leaving her standing alone with a ring she no longer wanted. That heartbreak changed her, not just in how she saw love, but in how she guarded herself against it. She made a promise she never spoke out loud, but it guided her every step after. Never fall for someone who isn't free to love you back. It wasn't just a rule, it was survival. Her friends often teased her for being too cautious. "You're too picky," they'd say. "You'll never find someone if you're always setting limits." But Emma wasn't picky. She was careful. She knew the weight of broken trust, the pain of giving too much, the danger of wanting what wasn't hers. That's why she built her life on routines that left little space for messy feelings. She had her job at the marketing firm, her weekend yoga classes, her small apartment in the heart of Seattle, and her circle of friends who made sure she laughed even when she didn't feel like it. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe, and safe was enough. Emma's mornings were always the same. She liked the order of brewing her coffee at exactly 7, sitting by her kitchen window and reading the headlines before heading to work. She liked knowing that her days were predictable, her world controlled. She wasn't closed off to the idea of love, not completely, but she wanted it only if it came honestly, cleanly, without any shadows of someone else's promises hanging over it. That was the line she swore she'd never cross. The thing about promises, though, is that they often get tested in ways you never expect. Emma never thought the test would come wrapped in the easy smile of Daniel Carter. She never thought it would walk into her office with coffee in hand and make her laugh on a Tuesday afternoon when the hours dragged. She never thought it would feel so harmless, so natural, that she didn't even notice when the ground beneath her promise began to shift. But that moment was still far away. For now, Emma sat at her desk, tapping her pen against a yellow notepad, unaware of how much her life was about to change. She believed she was safe. She believed her line was strong enough. She believed she could keep her heart exactly where it belonged, untouched, unshaken, unbroken. Emma didn't know it yet, but the story she thought she had already written for herself was only beginning. And the line she swore she'd never cross was already waiting in the distance, daring her to come closer. At first, it was simple. Emma and Daniel were just co-workers trying to finish projects on time. Their firm had landed a big client, and deadlines meant late nights under buzzing office lights. Most people packed up by 6, but Emma and Daniel often stayed until 9, side by side in the quiet hum of computers and the smell of takeout food. It felt easy, natural, like teamwork. Daniel was the kind of man who made long hours feel shorter. He wasn't loud or flashy, but he had a way of making even the most stressful tasks lighter. When Emma grew frustrated over numbers that didn't add up, he'd joke softly, "Maybe the spreadsheet just doesn't like you." She'd roll her eyes, but she'd smile too, the heaviness in her chest loosening. It started with pizza boxes spread across the conference table. Then came Thai noodles, burritos, and on one rainy night, warm clam chowder in paper cups. They ate and talked, not just about work, but about their lives outside the office. Daniel told her about his hometown in Oregon, about fishing trips with his dad, about the dog he wished he had time to adopt. Emma shared little pieces of herself, too. The way she loved running in the mornings, the old piano in her apartment she hadn't played in years. These were small things, but sharing them made the office feel less like work and more like something else. Emma reminded herself that it was safe. Daniel had a girlfriend. Everyone at the firm knew about her. He sometimes mentioned her in passing, how she liked a certain kind of wine, how they were planning a trip in the fall. That should have been the end of it. For Emma, that was the wall, the line. She wasn't the type to look past it. She had promised herself she never would. But still, she found herself noticing him. Noticing the way he leaned back in his chair when he was thinking, how his laugh came quick and unguarded when she made a sarcastic comment, how he always walked her to her car when the night was late and the parking lot was dark. None of it meant anything. At least, that's what she told herself. It was just kindness, just friendship, nothing more. The truth was, Emma hadn't laughed like this in years. She hadn't felt this seen, this understood in a long time. And though she pushed the thought away, a quiet part of her started to look forward to those late nights. She started to notice when Daniel wasn't around, to miss the sound of his voice when meetings stretched too long. She told herself it was normal. Coworkers grew close when they worked hard together. But deep down, she knew it was becoming something else. One evening, as they sat with empty coffee cups between them, Daniel leaned back and sighed. "You know, I don't mind these late nights as much when you're here," he said, almost casually. Emma's heart skipped. She laughed it off, replying lightly, "Well, you're just saying that because I bring the better snacks." But his eyes lingered on hers a moment too long. And for the first time, she felt the air shift between them. It was subtle, but she felt it. A spark she hadn't expected, a question she wasn't ready to answer. She shook it off, turned back to her work, and reminded herself of her promise. Daniel wasn't hers to want. That was the truth. That was the line. Yet as the weeks passed, the line began to blur in ways Emma couldn't stop. And though she told herself she was strong enough to resist, a quiet, undeniable truth began to grow inside her. Something dangerous, something tender, something she wasn't ready to name. Emma never noticed the exact moment things began to change, but looking back, she could see the signs clearly. At first, it was just the way Daniel listened. He had always been good at paying attention, but now his focus seemed sharper, like her words mattered more than they should. When she spoke during meetings, his eyes stayed on her longer than necessary, and when she joked, his laugh felt softer, almost private, like it was meant only for her. It wasn't obvious enough for anyone else to notice, but Emma felt it. She felt it the way a room changes when a storm is near. The air heavier. The silence charged. She told herself she was imagining it. She had to be. Daniel had a life, a girlfriend, and no reason to look at her that way. And yet there it was. That flicker in his eyes, a hesitation in his smile, a warmth that made her pulse race. The small touches were the hardest to ignore. One afternoon, they both reached for the same folder, and his hand brushed against hers. It should have been nothing, an accident barely a second long. But it wasn't nothing. Emma felt the spark run up her arm, and from the look on Daniel's face, she knew he felt it too. Neither of them said a word, but the silence spoke volumes. From then on, Emma became aware of everything. The way he stood just a little closer than before, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, the way he lingered at her desk after meetings, as if searching for reasons to stay. Each moment was small, but together, they built a weight that Emma carried everywhere. She fought against it. She tried to remind herself of her rule, the line she had sworn never to cross. She thought about his girlfriend, someone she had never met but respected from a distance. She told herself she couldn't be that woman, the one who stepped into a story that wasn't hers. But every time she drew that line, Daniel seemed to blur it with one more look, one more smile, one more moment that left her breathless. The worst part was how natural it felt. It didn't feel like temptation or betrayal. It felt like something inevitable, like the universe had quietly placed them side by side and whispered, "Pay attention." Emma hated that it felt right, because right wasn't supposed to come wrapped in this kind of wrong. One evening, as they sat in the break room waiting for the printer to finish, Emma caught him staring. She tilted her head. "What?" she asked, half teasing, half terrified. Daniel shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. "Nothing, just, you surprise me sometimes." Her heart stumbled. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she didn't. She looked away, gripping her coffee cup as if it could steady her. That was the moment Emma realized she was losing control. The subtle shift had already happened. They were standing on dangerous ground, pretending it was solid when both of them knew it was cracking beneath their feet. Emma didn't want to admit it, but the truth was clear. The line she swore she'd never cross was no longer just ahead of her. Daniel was already standing on it, and he was waiting to see if she would step closer. The rain came down hard that night, streaking the glass walls of the office with silver lines. The building was nearly empty, the usual chatter of co-workers replaced by the soft hum of computers and the steady patter of water against the windows. Emma sat at her desk, trying to focus on the final edits of a campaign, but her mind kept drifting. Daniel was only a few feet away, leaning back in his chair, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that made him distant. Instead, he looked thoughtful, like he was holding something in. Emma felt it before he spoke, the heaviness in the room, the shift in the air. She looked up from her screen, and that was when he asked the question that cracked everything open. "Do you ever feel?" he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "Like you met the right person at the wrong time?" Emma froze, her hands stilled on the keyboard, her breath caught in her chest. She stared at him, trying to decide if she had heard correctly. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. His eyes were steady on hers, and she knew he meant every word. Her first instinct was to laugh it off, to turn it into something harmless. But nothing about that question was harmless. It was loaded, dangerous, a confession hidden inside a simple sentence. And she couldn't pretend she didn't understand. Emma's heart raced. She had told herself again and again that what she felt was just imagination, just the side effect of long nights and shared stress. But his words shattered that lie. He wasn't just her friend. He wasn't just her colleague. He was standing on the same line she had sworn never to cross, and with one question, he had dared her to admit it. She looked down at her notebook, desperate to hide the flush in her cheeks. "That's a complicated thing to ask," she whispered, her voice tighter than she intended. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his expression unreadable. "Maybe, but it's true, isn't it? Sometimes timing is the only thing standing in the way." Her throat tightened. Timing. That was what this was. If he were single, if she hadn't made that promise, if life had unfolded differently, maybe she could have let herself fall. But he wasn't free and she wasn't reckless. She shook her head slowly. "You shouldn't say things like that," she told him, her words barely audible. But Daniel didn't back down. He didn't laugh it off or pretend he meant something else. He just sat there, watching her, as if waiting for her to answer a question she had tried so hard to avoid. Emma pushed back her chair, needing space. She walked to the window, arms crossed, staring at the rain as if it could wash away the storm inside her. She didn't know what scared her more, that he had said it, or that she wanted to say yes. Behind her, his voice was soft, almost pained. "I know I shouldn't, but I can't help it." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Emma closed her eyes. The line she had lived by, the one she thought was unbreakable, suddenly felt thin, fragile, ready to snap. And for the first time, she wondered if she had the strength to keep it intact. That night, nothing more was said. They worked in silence, side by side, both pretending they could go back to how things were before. But Emma knew the truth. That single question had changed everything. Once spoken, it couldn't be taken back. And now, every look, every word, every moment between them would carry the weight of what he had confessed. She had promised herself she would never cross that line. But Daniel had already stepped over it, and Emma wasn't sure how long she could keep herself from following. The morning after Daniel's question, Emma woke with a heaviness she couldn't shake. The rain was gone, replaced by clear skies, but her chest still carried the storm. His words echoed in her head, the right person at the wrong time. She wanted to forget them, pretend the moment had never happened. But she couldn't. It was like trying to unhear a song once it had lodged itself in your mind. So she did the only thing she knew. She pulled back. At work, she avoided him. She slipped out of meetings before he could catch her eye, ate lunch at her desk instead of in the break room, and left the office as soon as the clock hit 5. When he stopped by her desk, she gave short answers, polite but distant. She told herself it was the right thing. If she created space, the feelings would fade, and things would return to normal. But Daniel didn't let her disappear so easily. On Monday morning, he showed up at her desk with her favorite coffee, black with a splash of vanilla. "Thought you could use this," he said, smiling. Emma forced a thank you and turned quickly back to her screen. She thought he'd leave, but he lingered, waiting for something more. When it didn't come, he walked away quietly, but she could feel the weight of his disappointment. By Wednesday, he tried again. She found him waiting by the elevator, holding the doors as if he'd been timing her routine. "You've been avoiding me," he said softly once they were alone. Emma looked straight ahead, refusing to meet his eyes. "I've just been busy, Emma." His voice carried a tenderness that made her chest ache. "You don't have to run from me." She wanted to snap back, tell him she wasn't running, but the truth was written all over her silence. When the elevator opened, she hurried out, leaving him behind, her pulse racing as if she'd just sprinted across the city. Every step she took away from him felt like the right step, yet somehow it also hurt. She missed the easy laughter they used to share, the comfort of having him nearby. But she reminded herself of the promise she had made. If she gave in, if she crossed that line, she would lose more than she gained. Still, Daniel didn't give up. On Friday, when most of the office left early, he found her working at her desk. "You know," he said, leaning against her doorway, "it's strange. I see you every day, but it feels like I don't see you at all anymore." Emma finally looked up. His eyes searched hers, steady and full of something she wasn't ready to name. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking, "this isn't fair. You have someone. You don't get to say things like that." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then he nodded, stepping back. "You're right. I shouldn't. But it doesn't change how I feel." Emma turned away, her heart pounding. She wanted to tell him to stop, to let her go. But the truth was, she didn't want him to stop. That was what scared her most. All weekend, she replayed the week in her mind, the way he kept reaching out no matter how far she pulled away. She tried to convince herself that keeping distance was the only answer, but deep down, she knew something had shifted. The line she had once drawn so clearly was blurring, not because she crossed it, but because Daniel had already stepped over, and every time he reached for her, it became harder not to reach back. Emma had promised herself she would never let this happen. But promises were easy to make when your heart wasn't involved. Now, her heart was pulling her in a direction she had sworn she'd never go. And no matter how much she tried to fight it, she could feel herself slipping closer. It was a Thursday evening, the kind that dragged on longer than it should have. Most of the office had already cleared out, leaving behind only the sound of rain tapping against the windows and the hum of the overhead lights. Emma had stayed late to finish a report, hoping the quiet would keep her focused. She thought Daniel had left hours ago, but when she stood to grab her coat, she saw him leaning against the doorway, watching her. Her heart stumbled. She forced a smile, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought you were gone." "I was," he said softly, stepping into the room. "But then I realized I couldn't leave." Not without saying this. Emma froze. She knew that look in his eyes. She had been bracing for it, dreading it, and yet a part of her had been waiting too. "Daniel," she warned, her tone low, almost pleading, but he didn't stop. He walked closer, each step slow, deliberate, until he was standing just a few feet away. His voice dropped, filled with something raw and unguarded. "I can't pretend anymore. I've tried to ignore it. I've tried to act like it's nothing, but it's not. Emma, it's you. It's been you for a while now." Her breath caught. The words she had feared and wanted were now hanging between them. She gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white, as if holding on to the last piece of steady ground. "Don't," she whispered, shaking her head. "You can't say that." "I have to," he said, his voice breaking with urgency. "Because it's the truth, and I don't want to lie to myself anymore." Emma's chest tightened. She had dreamed of hearing those words, though she never admitted it even to herself. But now that they were real, they terrified her. Everything inside her screamed that this was wrong, that he wasn't hers to want, that she was stepping into dangerous territory. Yet another part of her, the part that had been lonely for years, ached to believe him. She turned away, walking toward the window, her arms folded tightly against her chest. Outside, the city lights blurred through the rain, glowing and distant. "Do you realize what you're saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. Do you realize what this means? Daniel took a step closer. I know exactly what it means. It means I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. I don't care how complicated it is. I care about you. More than I should. More than I planned. But I do. Emma's throat burned with unshed tears. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself fall into the warmth of his words. But the line she had drawn stood firm in her mind. You have someone else, she whispered, her voice breaking. And I swore I'd never be that person. Silence stretched between them. Daniel didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He simply stood there, his eyes heavy with something that looked like regret, but also like hope. I know, he finally said, and I wish it were different. But wishing doesn't change how I feel. Emma turned back to face him. For the first time, she let herself look fully at the man who had been unraveling her defenses piece by piece. She saw the sincerity in his face, the weight of his words, the risk he was taking just by saying them. And in that moment, she realized something she had been denying all along. She felt the same way. But feelings weren't enough. Not when the cost was so high. Her voice was quiet but steady when she spoke. I can't give you an answer, Daniel. Not tonight. Not like this. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded with something she couldn't name. He didn't push her, didn't beg her. He simply whispered, That's fair, before stepping back, giving her space she desperately needed but didn't want. When he left, Emma sank into her chair, her heart racing. She knew nothing would ever be the same. His confession had changed everything. The line she swore she would never cross was now broken, not because she had stepped over it, but because Daniel had. And now the choice was in her hands. Emma stared out at the rain, her thoughts spiraling. She had built her life on promises, on boundaries meant to protect her. But for the first time, she wasn't sure if protecting herself meant holding on to that line, or letting it go. Emma left the office that night with her mind in chaos. Daniel's confession followed her into the cool air, clinging to her like the mist rising from the pavement. She walked quickly toward her car, telling herself she needed space, silence, anything to stop her heart from beating so fast. But she heard his footsteps behind her, steady, determined, refusing to let her go so easily. At the edge of the parking lot, she turned, her voice sharper than she meant. Daniel, please, don't follow me. He stopped a few feet away, his hands shoved into his pockets, his expression tense but calm. I can't just leave things like that. Not after what I said, not after what I feel. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, her breath visible in the cool night air. Do you realize what you're asking of me? Do you understand what it would mean if I let this happen? Her voice cracked, but she held his gaze, desperate for him to understand the weight of it. Daniel stepped closer, though still keeping a careful distance. His voice was steady, firm, but tender. Yes, I know. I know it's complicated and I know it's not fair. But I also know I've never been more certain of anything. Emma, I don't want to live my life wondering what it could have been with you. Her heart twisted. She wanted to believe him, wanted to step forward and close the space between them. But fear anchored her in place. She thought of the promise she had made, the line she had sworn never to cross. She thought of his girlfriend, the life he was already tied to. And then she thought of herself, how lonely she had been, how rare it was to feel this kind of connection. She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. It isn't that simple. Love isn't just about what we want. It's about the people who could get hurt. Daniel's voice dropped lower. I know, and I don't want to hurt anyone. But Emma, what I feel for you is real. You can't deny it either. I see it in your eyes every time you look at me. Emma's breath hitched. His words pierced through the walls she had tried so hard to build. She hated that he was right. She hated that he could see the truth she had been trying to bury. But more than that, she hated that she couldn't bring herself to lie to him. She turned away, staring at the empty street beyond the parking lot, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared, Daniel. I'm scared of losing myself in something I know I shouldn't want. He moved one step closer, his presence warm even in the cold night. Then let me be the one who proves it's worth the risk. Emma closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling as if she had run miles. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the soft rush of the wind, carrying with it all the things neither of them could say out loud. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw him standing there, waiting, not pushing, not forcing, but hoping. And something inside her broke. The line she had clung to for so long didn't feel like protection anymore. It felt like a wall keeping her from something she deeply needed. She took a shaky breath and whispered, "I don't know if I can cross that line." Daniel's voice was steady. "You don't have to tonight. Just don't walk away from me." Not yet. The honesty in his words undid her. Emma felt the pull of him like gravity. Undeniable. Inescapable. She didn't step closer, but she didn't step away either. She stood there, suspended between fear and longing, knowing this night would mark her forever. When she finally drove home, she couldn't shake the image of him standing under the streetlight, waiting for her to choose. She lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart torn in two. She thought about the promise she had made, about the life she wanted to live with integrity, but she also thought about Daniel. His voice, his eyes, the way he made her feel alive again. It was a night she couldn't forget. Not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. And deep down, Emma knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a choice that would change everything.